Well, hey, how are you? You are here with me, Barry Hawkins, on another episode of Barry Hawkins Live, and we're continuing our journey through the aspects and elements of effective development process at the team level. We're going to continue our journey through effective team level development process before we move on to some of our other topics like product management, product development life cycles, how those look in an agile or lean setting and mindset. And then we'll eventually be moving on to the topic of scaling product development efforts. So won't all of that be fun? But again, we are in effective development process and we're continuing in the effective artifacts of development process. Tonight, effective burndown charts. Burndown charts are one of the two artifacts that are referred to often as highly visible information emitters. The first is the task board, and the complement to the task board is what we're talking about tonight, the burndown chart. Now, for the uninitiated, anything that has the word burn down in it sounds like it might not be good, but this one is. So hang tight. We'll see if we can allay any fears that may be arising. All right, so let's start with what is a burn down chart. So when a team has planned a development sprint or cycle, they've pulled in a batch of work based on what they believe they can complete, and it's directionally informed by their velocity or throughput, which is the rolling 6-cycle or 6-sprint average of the story points they complete in their development cycles. But then in a more refined manner with more information, they're also informing that commitment based on how much taskable capacity they have. That is, how many taskable hours per cross-functional skill when they're planning the sprint, because velocity or throughput is just a directional guide, but you also know concretely which team members are going to be present, if there are any company holidays, national holidays, what have you, and you of course decrement the capacity you plan against by who may or may not be there. And it's the result of using that taskable capacity, tasking it out in hours, setting up that batch of work. That sets the stage for, one, a well-structured task board, but then two, its companion, the burndown chart. So a burndown chart, quite simply, a burndown chart it's a two-dimensional chart. On its vertical axis are taskable hours, and on its horizontal axis are days. Most people these days use a 2-week development cycle or sprint, and so that would be 10 days along the horizontal axis, and then they would have taskable hours. To see what one looks like, here's an example of a burn down chart that's just been started. You'll see here that they have committed to a batch that has 98 taskable hours. So for all of the stories, all the outcomes that they've pulled into the sprint, when they've tasked it out, the total number of taskable hours across all the tasks in that batch is 98 hours. And you can see here that there's that dotted line starting at the number of taskable hours that goes straight to the 10th day there on the horizontal axis. And that's called the trajectory line. And we use that to plot basically a guide for the team that generally we should be trending in that direction. If we're going to complete all of the work that we've committed to, we should be trending in that direction. So it serves as a guide, not something that we should rigidly be snapping to, mind you, because work does not flow that naively. But generally, we want to not be going too far above or too far below that line. And then you'll see one thing I love here in this particular example is that this team has done something that I'm quite fond of, which is capturing their sprint goals. That is, when they talk about how they're doing at being effective as a team, they've captured here their goals of, using a physical task board instead of Jira, after my own heart. Hold at least 2 user story sessions per sprint, evenly spaced throughout the sprint. So that is for those of you who've seen the episodes on backlog grooming and backlog maintenance. This team is realizing that they need to spend more time on their backlog, refining it so that the queue of work is in a better state when it comes to be pulled into the next development cycle. And then move to a 5 taskable hour per day planning base. That is, when we talk about cycle planning or sprint planning, this team is cultivating an understanding of what are the taskable hours per day for each team member that they plan against and budget against, realizing that, not the entire day is allocated to doing taskable work. So figuring out what that number of hours is to sustainably plan for schedulable work as opposed to interrupt driven work and the interactions that we all have to undertake together. So with the burn down chart, once you have it created and in place, then every day of the cycle, and I usually recommend after the daily stand-up each day, because that's usually when each team member has updated their schedulable tasks. So you have the most up-to-date information. So I usually look at, me personally, I will look at the tasks, get my new hours total, and then plot that next point on the burn down chart after my daily stand-ups. And as you go along, it starts to look something like this. So you can see here, this team is going along, and they started with 127 hours, total taskable hours. And then day over day, after their stand-up, they've updated it with the remaining. And you can see that they're largely trending right on target. The amount of variation above the line there, that's still, to me, that's like picture perfect, idyllic, like nothing's going wrong there. But you can see that they're able to see how they're trending towards actually completing the work from a taskable hours perspective there. So in this respect, the burn down chart helps you visualize the trajectory of the work, the scheduled work that you've planned, and whether it's staying the course or it's not going away fast enough, or is it going away too soon because we, undercommitted, or we had to pull some things out of the sprint. All right, so those are burn down charts. Now, when it comes to key aspects of effective burn down charts, what are a few critical pointers for folks to be aware of? One is, burn down charts are meant to be tracked in hours, taskable hours, not story points or the unit of measure that are on your stories or backlog items. Burn down is meant to track the units of measure put on your tasks, not your stories. If I was speaking in Jira language, it's the hours on your Jira subtasks, not the story points on your stories and bugs in your backlog that you're pulling into the sprint. So why is that a big deal? Well, the thing is, the intended design with burn down charts is to be a granular day over day where you see significant movement in executing the work that you've planned out. And the thing about story points is that's a far more coarse-grained unit of measure. You're estimating using the story point scale 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40, 100, and your the number of stories and their points, totaling that up, that tends to be a far lower number. And since you would not take away story points on the burn down chart until the entire story is finished, it also typically tends to be a very coarse-grained and lagging indicator. Whereas with taskable hours, the number of hours that people are completing day over day should change significantly and should give you a trend line, like what we were looking at earlier. When you don't, looking back at that diagram, so here you are, like day over day, taskable hours. You can see it's following just like you expect most 2D line charts to track. But if you look at what it tends to look like in some of the systems the digital systems that track against story points, you see this, where it's a very, it almost looks like someone's oscilloscope is broken. For anyone with an electrical engineering background, for those who don't have one, I'm very sorry for that analogy. But you can see that it's very stepwise, right? It's very stepwise and goes a while before things change. In fact, this is, if you can believe it, this is actually a pretty good burn down chart tracked by story points, because it is somewhat following the trend line. But what you'll often see is the line just goes out for days and days and days, and it'll take a huge drop, and then days and days and days, and it'll take a huge drop, so that it basically looks like if a small child or an insect were looking at the side of human-sized stairs, it looks kind of like that. And that doesn't tell you a trend. That doesn't tell you a day over day trend. That usually tells you, well, we made it, or oh, we didn't, on the third to last or second to last day of the sprint. In fact, the way that this particular example here is trending more closely to the actual trajectory line, I usually see this when teams are burning down by story points, but the burn down chart is not working for them. So they actually start to create items in their backlog that are not stories and outcomes, but instead they start to create tasks in their backlog, so that the burn down chart will progress more naturally. And I say naturally, but you can see here that it doesn't really progress naturally in a line graph. I've always thought of, and this is actually a pretty tame JIRA burn down by story points. My favorite ones are the ones that actually where the line loops back on itself in a square. It like goes backwards in time and then comes down and goes forward. So many of these story point based burn down charts, to me, it's like someone's kid got a hold of mom and dad's box wine, or the Manischewitz for my Jewish friends, got a hold of mom and dad's box wine and their Etch-a-Sketch, and just went drunk Etch-a-Sketching, because it's a lot of squares and right angles that are very hard to follow. Definitely not a trend line. Use taskable hours, not story points, if you want a burn down chart to serve its intended purpose for you. All right. Next, one of the key purposes for a burn down chart is when you're seeing that trajectory of the work, it becomes a safe and objective prompt for clarifying questions with the team about how the development cycle or sprint is going. And I generally, general guidance that I give to people in team steward or scrum master, delivery manager roles is, if you're with your burn down chart, even if your task board looks great, like things are moving across the task board, if the remaining taskable hours on your burn down chart flatlines for 2 days, no matter how well the stand up went, that is, for me, that's a prompt for a timeout, to have a discussion with the team to say, hey, so are things really going okay? Because that's not what I'm seeing on the burn down chart. It looks like more hours are being added to some tasks, we're whittling away at some others, but overall we're not making progress. And that's the nice thing about a burn down chart, is it makes it less accusatory, and it just, here's what we're seeing, as you're all telling us, as we're all telling one another what hours remain on the work we've committed to. This is just what it's looking like. Here's another example. So here's one that I would say, so if I was scrum mastering this team or team stewarding this team, after the stand up on day 7, I would definitely call a team huddle and just ask, hey, we're trending fairly well, but we're getting pretty close to a flat line. Let's talk about the work and talk about what's going on. And you want to have that conversation as soon as you spot a trend like that, because let's say you're in day 7, and let's say there are 10 stories in this sprint. The team has pulled in 10 stories, and they pulled them in the priority order. And let's say that the top 3 stories have been particularly hard. There was a lot of found work, that sort of thing. And so some people have hopped down and started to do some of the other stories, because it's like, well, while we're trying to figure out, these 2 people are going to pair program on that, I'm going to jump down here and do this. So tasks have been moving for the team day over day. But overall, the number of schedulable hours is not going down, and we're not seeing stories complete or go to user acceptance testing or for, final QA review or regression. And so as soon as you spot that, being able to have that conversation, well, now we're in a position of being able to proactively choose what to do with the development cycle. Because if it looks like, well, we've made a little bit of progress on everything, we're finally starting to figure out what's happening with the top 2 stories, let's just focus on those, because those are the 2 things that our downstream teams and departments are waiting on for things that have actual dates that they need to launch. So let's focus on that. And if that means some of these lower down items carry over, that's a better choice than having everything come to the end of the sprint or the development cycle and none of it completes, because we just kept hopping back and forth. So your burn down chart, it gives you that prompt and somewhat of a safe space or a safe artifact to look at and say, hey, I know we're all saying we think it's going to be okay, but based on what we're seeing here, let's dig in on that a little bit and see, like, are we really, do we really feel like this is going to go well? All right. And then final point for tonight on burn down charts. Burn down charts, when they were originally developed in Scrum in the 90s, in fact, I think it was up until the early 2000s, burn down charts, their official name, if you go back to the Ken Schwaber and Mike Beadle Scrum book, you'll actually see them referred to as sprint signatures. And the analogy there being like statistical signatures, if you've ever looked at statistical data distributions and signatures over time at how a system or a data set has a signature pattern. And I love that when I came across that term, I loved it because it really resonated for me with what I see with teams. Because what I see with teams and burn down charts is that even if you have a team whose burn down chart looks very spiky during their sprints, they can have a spiky signature to their burn down chart, but still complete their work. Some of it has to do with team dynamics and how things are resolved for teams. If in fact, looking at an example here, this example here is from a team that I stewarded for a good long while. That this was their signature. We used to laugh about it. It was just something about the way we were and what we were working on. We would have the sprint would start off. We would all feel very good about what we had committed to, and for the first few days, looking good. And then suddenly, it was typically between the 3rd and 5th day, there was a, oh, I don't know, this stuff is looking bad, and the remaining hours would shoot up. It would shoot up. This is one of the more dramatic ones, but it would shoot up very high. But then the remaining 3 to 4 days of the sprint would play out like action adventure television series, where it's like someone has to get into serious trouble and also wrap things up in about 25 minutes. And it would go like that. We would be the crew that found the duct tape and the spare wire. And we're able to diffuse things just in time. And we overall had a quite stable velocity or throughput and a relatively stable projected to completed ratio. So that was our signature. And it's one of the reasons I love having large, visible burn down charts, and I love keeping them, is to be able to look at the trend. When I've been co-located with teams, I will typically create these. In fact, this sheet of paper here is an example. There are large flip charts that have post-it backing, and I would create the burn down chart on these, plot it, and then afterwards stack them all up. And we would have them. We would use them like a flip book. We would actually flip, like the flip animated cartoons, and it would be interesting to see how true that signature was for us. And it helped us figure out, yeah, this is kind of the way we work, but we deliver. Nobody's feeling any, particular pain as a result of the way we work. This just seems to be how we roll. And you know what? If a team is healthy and effective, they all feel a sense of cohesion. They feel a sense of agency over how they approach the work and the level of effort needed to complete it. Hey, you can have your trip to the Himalayas Burndown chart. That's okay. It's just part of the nature of the way you work, and it's one of the things that your artifacts are helping you discover and know about yourselves as a team. So not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. Alrighty, let's see what we have in question land today. All right, John Mayer has one for us. All right, first up. My biggest issue with Burndowns is that it doesn't account for unplanned work. I'm curious as to your thoughts on that. Great one. Great question. So that's where you heard me say earlier, talking about the Burndown chart, that it's tracking the schedulable, the remaining number of hours, taskable hours on schedulable work that we've pulled into the sprint. This is where the combination of task board, Burndown chart, but also development log, which is an artifact we'll be covering next in the series. This is where they all work in concert, because the core and the task board and Burndown chart are core elements of Scrum. They've been around for decades. But to John's observation there, they focus on and are meant to account for schedulable work. That is not interrupt-driven work that hits the team during the cycle. And it was because of that, after several years practicing Agile in a variety of settings, that I created an additional artifact called the development log. And the development log has explicit sections for capturing planned work, unplanned work. In fact, the terms I use are backlog work and non-backlog work, so that you're explicitly capturing and journaling for your teams and for the people who ask your teams for work. Our backlog work, this is what we pulled into our cycle as task, schedulable work. But here's all, and in non-backlog, here are the interrupt-driven things that did not travel through our queue at all. They just came in hot and sideways, and here's roughly how big they were and how much of an impact they had. And journaling that, we'll talk about it more deeply when we get to development logs, but journaling that actually helps both the team and people outside the team understand, hey, on average, this volume of unplanned work hits this team. And that's part of what informs how much of their bandwidth they put towards schedulable work and how much of it they reserve for what they know to be an average guaranteed amount of unplanned interrupt-driven work that hits them as part of actually doing their job. Because when you own, so many teams these days are owning the uptime and deployment, provisioning, and responding to alerts and outages for the applications or services that they develop. And that's part of their life. So you should never be using all of any team that's got that kind of situation, you should never be using all of their available time at work just for the schedulable stuff. You have to be carving out, and I talk a lot about teams having an understanding of this, their ratio of schedulable to interrupt-driven work, because you have to understand that to be able to plan and project in a sustainable fashion for teams to be healthy and effective. So thank you, John, for that excellent question. In fact, it looks like there may be a follow-up. Yes. Oh, yeah, let's look at this. As a follow-up, how do you manage the accurate, inaccurate, burn down versus good, bad burn down discussion? I find myself having this conversation with both the dev team and management. The accurate and inaccurate burn down, it's part of, so I frame the burn down charts conversations around burndown charts and around throughput or velocity and the projected to completed ratio. I talk about these three things in concert because they are both the burndown chart artifact and the throughput or velocity metric and the projected to completed ratio metric. They are all conveying aspects of how well does this team understand its work and understand their work together cross-functionally as a group. Because there are a number, in fact, that's potentially even a good episode on factors that influence the effectiveness or the accuracy of burndowns, because I'll find a couple of examples. So teams whose story point estimations and whose sprint planning are heavily dominated by engineering and don't listen enough to QA or UX, those often lead to overcommitment. That is, it's tasked out a certain way and this should be fine, but it's not accounting for, one, how much time QA or UX need to do their part of the work, especially the downstream parts for QA and the downstream part of UX that is like, facilitating UAT review, that sort of thing, ensuring that the user flows have been preserved in the work that was done. And so you'll have what looks like a good sprint that blows up on the end or flatlines on the end, and it's because there wasn't enough open, psychologically safe, cross-functional discussion around committing to the work, and it shows up. In fact, that's one of the purposes of burndown charts and the two metrics that I use around development process is to make that more visible, so that first the team can talk about it, but then secondly, so that management and functional discipline leadership can talk about which teams need help or coaching in being better partners to one another. But it should all be, to John's point, also when talking to management or when management's talking to teams about these things, it should all be it should all be framed in terms of how do we help support and equip you for effectiveness, not a wall of shame or public humiliation on an email thread or what have you. It should be all focused around these metrics, these artifacts, as far as functional leadership, should be a cue for where do we need to throw our bandwidth support toward in order to foster, nurture, and support our people, not who should show up with a red bar across their team name as opposed to a green bar. Because those aren't good. All right, what else do we have? Does the impact of a burndown chart justify the time it takes to make it? This is a great question, because I think it speaks to the heart of the craft of delivery management. And I say delivery management because it's for me, that is the umbrella term that encompasses technical program management, scrum mastering, game production or game dev management for the studios that use that term. What justifies the effort and time it takes to make a given artifact for your team, for as part of your development process, is, does that time investment result in greater clarity and greater effectiveness for the team? I very often run into delivery management professionals who balk at the idea of producing development logs, of producing a burndown chart, or even a more effective task board other than what default comes out of the box for whatever software they use. And it's where I believe a large part of the delivery management craft has lost its way. There's a loss of the vision and mission for the craft, because the whole discipline, the whole idea behind delivery management is to be specialists in helping visualize the work and facilitate conversations so that development teams can be more effective together than they would be otherwise if you were not there. The craft of delivery management, it should make a difference and an impact that you're there. And a large part, if not most of, your time in a day or week should be in support and service of making that happen, of amplifying the team's impact by doing what it takes to make the work clearer, the progress of the work clearer, helping teams inspect how their development cycles are going, how they might adapt toward greater effectiveness. It's at the heart of it. When I did the task board episode recently, I actually had a former mentee contact me and say, hey, so at the studio that I'm at, there's a software system that I have to create for the company. And then I also create a task board for my team because my team hates the system that the company uses. And this helps them be more effective. But am I being wasteful? Should I not be duplicating this? And to which my answer is, you should absolutely be doing that. You're not doing the wrong thing. And if anyone's criticizing you for that from a management or leadership standpoint, they don't understand your craft. I loved that question because it's at the heart of what makes for good team stewardship. And so to that person, I didn't get permission to share your name, so I won't. But thank you for contacting me with that question. All right. This is a fair question. Isn't a task board enough if you do a really good job with it? I can see where that would seem to be the case, but it gets to the fact that a task board is created, is structured for a specific purpose, and a Burndown chart exists for a complementary yet separate purpose. The task board is helping you visualize the overall progress of the outcomes you've committed to, how much is in progress at the same time, where in your flow from to do, in progress, in review, done, where things are getting stuck if they're getting stuck. But you can have a task board that looks wonderful. You can have a task board with just 2 or 3 stories and a few of their tasks still up there on the 8th day of the 10-day sprint. But if you look at that Burndown chart and there's still 40 hours of taskable work on those handful of items, where the task board is telling you things look great, the Burndown chart is complementing that task board to say, actually, it may look like there's just a few things to get over the line, but they're actually massive. And in that way, Burndown charts and task boards, they work together and complement one another because they expose different aspects of the flow of work through the team. And if you're, and I think healthy skepticism is reasonable there. So I would say if you're wondering if it's enough, I would say conduct thorough, rigorous experiments with your team. If you're not doing Burndown charts right now, try doing them and see how it goes. Have evaluation criteria. If the team feels like, well, we don't know that things aren't looking good until it's too late to do anything about it, or it's not clear how far off or on target we are for hitting things. Well, that's exactly what a Burndown chart is made to help with. One of the main things it's made to help with. So have that be, we're going to try it out. We're going to do it as intended, and we're going to come to the end of this sprint and say, so did that Burndown chart help us with this pain point or not? If it helped, great, let's keep doing it. If not, ask yourself, are there ways we could do the Burndown chart better, or do we just feel like this isn't something that's adding value for us right now? Alrighty, last question. Can you share examples of when a burn down chart helped you? I'll pick one because we're short on time. Yes, the short answer is yes, repeatedly, because I do find that teams can be having wonderful stand-ups. The task board can look like things are moving along quite well, but there are sometimes things that don't surface on the task board in the daily stand-up that the task board helps expose. And it's usually when, so for me, most often, I would have, I'm thinking of a particular team scenario where there was someone who had taken on some work and it was a bit of a stretch, and they would keep saying, at the stand-up each day, they would say, I've got this. It's like there's probably 5 hours left here, but I've got it. It's going to be fine. And then it's 5 hours, and then it's 6 hours or 4 hours, but it was tense with the team. But I used the burn down chart to say, hey everybody, so this, we're flatlining. We're flatlining, and we've got to figure out, do we need to pull something off the sprint? What things are there things that are bloating or are bigger or hairier than we intended? And just talking about the overall body of work actually made it comfortable enough for one team member to suggest, hey, I think he could use some more support. So maybe I pair a program with him and see if we can break the log jam on that. And it was, the person didn't say thank you, they didn't say good because I've been stuck, but you could tell you could see relief, because I believe that because they had made such a strong argument for, I want to be the one to run with this, they didn't feel comfortable admitting that it was they had bitten off a bit more than they probably should have. And so having the burn down chart there, being able to talk about the overall load of work, it reinforces like, hey, for each one of us, if we're stuck and we need help, if we just let it sit and we don't admit that and ask for help, it's going to show up on the burn down chart, because that thing's going to just flatten, right, and plateau instead of going down like it's supposed to. So that's I was thinking of one particular incident, but that particular scenario has played out time and again for me over the years. So there you are. Well, that's what we have for this episode on effective burn down charts. As always, if you find value, if this was of intrigue and interest to you, and you want to know when other things are coming out, please do be sure to like the video and subscribe, and click that notifications bell so you'll be sure to get prompted on when things are coming up, so that you can have reminders set. And if you're watching this on demand afterward, you can help get your calendar going so that you can join us live and ask your questions in real time. I am Barry Hawkins. Thank you for joining me on Barry Hawkins Live. And as always, I wish you the most healthy teams and effective development process that you could possibly have. We'll see you next time.